From high above, Atherton is easy to spot. 5 square miles of green, completely surrounded by bustling businesses, dense neighborhoods, and busy roadways that connect San Francisco and the Silicon Valley. An island in suburbia, Atherton is a place where residents cherish their independence and are committed to preserving the unique rural beauty of the town. The earliest known inhabitants of the Atherton area were the Ohlone. These peaceful hunter-gatherers lived in harmony with the lush landscape.
Our ancestors learned at the beginning of time that they were responsible for this place. And they understood the interaction between us and the land. It was what sustained us. Everything was alive to us. That intimate connection over thousands and thousands of years in one place. Elders describe us as being here nearly 10,000 years. Our ancestors were spread out in multiple villages from the Mountain View area south of here, approximately up to the tip of the San Francisco Peninsula. There was a lot more trees probably. You'd have a lot more streams. And you'd probably see salmon, among other fish, in those streams. And the villages were small, 150, 200.
Spanish explorers began arriving in the area in the late 1700s. In 1769, members of the historic Portola expedition reported that the Ohlone peoples were friendly and welcomed them.
In the case of Portola through our area, their journals tell us that some of them got sick and even died because they had missed their intended location they were supposed to go to, Monterey Bay.
It was Ohlone tribe members that gave the European explorers their first glimpse of the vast San Francisco Bay.
A couple of them went up the ridge, and then for the first time, Europeans saw the San Francisco Bay. And what they saw when they got up there is a lot of villages, because a lot of them had fires, and you could see, obviously, that the Bay Area was well occupied by Ohlone people.
The Spanish began building missions along the California coast. Their objective was to convert the native people to Christianity, and it was the beginning of the end of the Ohlone way of life.
From the founding of the first missions to little after statehood, more than 90% of our people were gone. The mission system devastated us and prevented us from continuing our way of life that existed for 10,000 years.
In the late 1700s and early 1800s, the Spanish and Mexican governments issued many land grants in California. By 1846, vast ranchos were granted to about 800 private landowners.
In 1795, the King of Spain granted 32,500 acres to Don Jose Arguello, which became Rancho de las Pulgas. This was a very large ranch in the southern San Francisco Peninsula that encompassed the areas of Atherton, Portola Valley, Menlo Park, Woodside, Redwood City, and San Mateo.
In 1848, the discovery of gold in the Sacramento Valley triggered a chain of events that would change the course of history. As the news spread, thousands of prospective gold miners traveled to the San Francisco Bay Area from all over the world to seek their fortunes.
The gold rush brought an enormous number of people into Northern California, particularly into San Francisco, and a city developed. So there was enormous demand for food and produce and building materials in San Francisco, so they sourced those materials on the peninsula. That started a real development of pushing the peninsula south. Before 1863, most people came into the southern peninsula by boat, getting off in Redwood City and getting a stagecoach or a wagon, but the roads were very, very poor.
Trains began running between San Francisco and the peninsula in 1863.
The San Francisco and San Jose Railroad was completed in 2 or 3 years. They built it fairly quickly.
At that time, the Atherton area was known as Fair Oaks.
It was a long time before there was any place named Atherton.
There was enough activity in Fair Oaks that it became a flag stop on the railroad. Someone could stop the train by simply flagging it down.
1866 is the first time that we've been able to find that there was a formally identified flag stop at what was then called Fair Oaks.
Thanks to the train, wealthy families from San Francisco began building summer homes there to escape the city's cold and foggy weather. These large estates were used to raise produce and livestock and to source building materials for the growing city of San Francisco. A map of Fair Oaks in 1894 shows approximately 50 property owners, about half of whom owned at least 100 acres. One of these early property owners was Faxon Dean Atherton, a hide and tallow merchant who purchased about 500 acres in 1860.
Faxon Dean Atherton was from New England and came around the base of South America and stopped in Chile and met his wife. After a while, a friend of his said, "Oh, there's this wonderful part of Northern California that you need to go to." And so he came up here and built his home just off of El Camino Real, which is Old Country Road, up to the Alameda. When he died, he divided up the property amongst his 7 children. So we have many streets named after his children.
In 1862, Faxon Atherton built a large summer house in Fair Oaks. It was called Valparaiso Park, and it was located where the Menlo Circus Club is today.
James C. Flood came to California during the gold rush. He was one of the silver barons in San Francisco, but found the property off of Middlefield Road. The home was built in 1878 to 1880. It was a white structure called the Flood Wedding Cake. James C. Flood developed this as a park with his house in the center. One of the things he wanted was for the property to be open to the public. Walking through Lindenwood is like walking back through history. You can see the different artifacts. They're well taken care of.
Many other large homes were built in Fair Oaks over the next few decades, including one that belonged to Ansel Adams' grandparents at the corner of Middlefield and Marsh Road. Sadly, none of these original houses still exist. The oldest home in Atherton today is the Watkins House, built in 1866. On April 18, 1906, Northern California was rocked by a deadly 7.9 magnitude earthquake. More than 3,000 people lost their lives, and an enormous fire destroyed 80% of the buildings in San Francisco. Many of the city's residents started moving to the peninsula.
In 1912, Southern Pacific asked the residents to identify a different name than Fair Oaks because there was a train station in Sacramento County called Fair Oaks. The residents got together at the home of Perry Ayers, and they decided to change the name to Atherton in honor of Faxon Atherton.
The early residents of Fair Oaks wanted the town to remain residential only. In Menlo Park, residents wanted Fair Oaks to become part of their city.
On July 30th, 1923, there was a meeting at a general store in Menlo Park called Duff and Doyle, which was attended both by residents of Menlo Park and residents of what was called Fair Oaks to incorporate both Menlo Park and Fair Oaks as one unit. The Fair Oaks residents didn't want to do that because Menlo Park was much more commercially focused, and they didn't want to be dominated by commercial interests. So the Fair Oaks residents gathered 88 signatures on a petition to incorporate as a separate town of Fair Oaks. And in the morning, 3 of the residents took the petition by horseback on what were dirt roads to the county seat in Redwood City. And they were in a race against a competing petition from Menlo Park residents. The Fair Oaks residents arrived at the courthouse about an hour and a half before the Menlo Park residents, and their petition was accepted with the condition that they had to change the name from Fair Oaks because there was already a town in the Sacramento area called Fair Oaks. They decided to name it Atherton, and that petition was accepted. On September 7th, the residents voted 116 to 14 to accept the Incorporation of Atherton. That vote was acknowledged by the state of California on September 12th, and Atherton formally became a city.
1 year later, the Board of Trustees approved a bond to build a new city hall. That original building now stands as Atherton's historic town hall. By the time World War II began in 1939, only 4 of the original estates had been subdivided, and the population was less than 2,500. After World War II, Atherton grew much more rapidly. At least 63 properties were subdivided, and by 1970, the population had grown to about 8,100. In 1958, Atherton homeowner Olive Holbrook Palmer passed away and left her family's farm, called Elmwood, to the town of Atherton.
This was a farm. They had 22 acres of hay and vegetables and livestock. For me, the important image that I see when I see the carriage house and the water tower is that they really were functional, vital parts of life at one point in this town. For hay storage, for water, for animal care, for housing, for the workers that worked here.
The property became known as Holbrook Palmer Park. Since 1965, the town has added tennis courts, a children's playground, baseball field, and pavilion to the park. And it remains Atherton's only park today. From the 1950s to the 1980s, many Atherton residents became daily commuters, working in San Francisco and traveling there by train. In the 1970s, nearby Silicon Valley was becoming a global epicenter of computer technology, and many tech executives began making Atherton their home. Today, there are about 7,100 residents in Atherton, and they remain committed to preserving its peaceful, small-town atmosphere. Between 2013 and 2022, Atherton designed and built a new town center, including a police station, administrative building and planning offices, a city council chamber, and a new library.
What makes Atherton so special? It's beautiful. The large redwood trees, oak trees add so much to the feeling of the town. There's also a real feeling of privacy.
We are still in one of the most beautiful places in the world. We're still here. We're still here and trying to fulfill our sacred obligation to take care of the land and the living things on it. Everybody should be doing that.
Atherton today is a very green, open place. It's not busy. People want that quiet and that peace, and that's why people move here.
A century after it was founded, Atherton remains a rural oasis, a place where innovative thinkers and leaders come to escape the hectic pace of the business world, a place where peace and privacy are protected, a town still defined by the ancient trees, winding lanes, and elegant gardens of its past.